Hello everybody, today you join me for something really quite wonderful. Some cars I drive because I'm amazed by their performance or perhaps their place in automotive history. Other cars I drive because I simply think they're going to just make me smile, and today is one of those. I am driving a 1959 Austin Healey Frogeye Sprite. Now what makes this car even more special is the fact that it has a fantastic story attached to it. This car was purchased by the current owner's grandfather in 1959, and it has been in the family ownership ever since. It saw fairly frequent use up until about the 1970s, when it started then being used as a sort of high days and holidays car before being laid up in the mid-1990s. The owner then decided to take it upon himself to bring it back to life, and it's presented here in what you might call authentic condition. This is not a show car, this is not a car that's undergone a sort of thorough restoration. It's something that's been brought back to life with things done as and when they were needed. It is an ongoing project, and I admire it for that. It's very easy to be impressed by a car that somebody's just chucked 100 grand at and sent to some concours winning restorer, but somehow I'm always much more in love with things like this. They're just so much more special. The car's value is really quite irrelevant. A good Frogeye Sprite is actually still something of a bargain in the classic car world these days, being about £15,000 to £20,000 for a good one, but that's not really the point of today. Today is something of an automotive palate cleanser. It's a way of me kicking back, relaxing after a period of, well, a few months solid of driving a huge number of cars. I'm hitting the reset switch basically, and it's nice to do this because it reminds you just where we've come from. It teaches you about the things that we now do far better than we ever used to, and in many ways it reminds you about the things that our ancestors did so much better than we. The first thing that strikes you when you get in this is just how diminutive it is. I've been driving around my Honda S2000 for the last month as a daily driver, and that is actually a fairly small car. This makes it look positively gargantuan. It's adorable, it really is. Now, for those viewing from abroad, this car got its nickname, the Frogeye, from that front end. Now, these are actually a very popular car in the hill climb scene and for various forms of motorsport, and you can kind of see why. They've got the A-Series engine up front, producing in this trim about 40 horsepower. The car has a 4-speed gearbox, which is actually not that bad to use. I'm always slightly concerned with things like this because it is very easy to put it into reverse. There isn't much to stop you from doing it other than the fact that the gearbox will start protesting. There is no synchro mesh in first, so you should only really put it back into that gear when you are stationary. But other than that, it's actually pretty delightful to sort of potter along in. I'm doing now 40 mile an hour in a 60 limit, and I am quite content at this speed. It is not the sheer assault on the senses that the Morgan three-wheeler is, and it is a very analog car. The brake pedal has a very long travel, and it will not stop you in a hurry. In fact, you need to be looking fairly far down the road, and that's probably the biggest weak point of the car. Of course, there will be a million different ways to upgrade it, but this is a constant work in progress. So the good news is that because you occupy so little of the road, those situations where you have to suddenly stop are considerably fewer than in a modern car, which takes up all of the available space. The steering wheel is utterly massive, which I suppose is their way of countering for the, of course, lack of power steering, and it means that the car is actually very easy to turn. There's actually surprisingly little play in it, although you can feel the fact that the chassis is not stiff at all, the suspension is not stiff at all, and so if you're expecting it to perform like a modern convertible, not going to happen. The whole thing flexes and moves, but it talks to you. It's really quite wonderful. Indeed, it is kind of like listening to a kindly old gentleman rambling on about his lesser days. Some of the stuff that he tells you might be utter nonsense, but a lot of what he's got to say is really quite important and quite fantastic to listen to. Indicators, much like in a Caterham, will not cancel themselves, and so I'm no doubt going to drive down the road with those on at some point. The clutch is very easy to operate, and indeed, up to about that sort of 40-50 mile an hour limit, the car is quite easy. Now, it will keep with modern traffic up to about sort of 60 mile an hour without overheating. That is thanks to much of the work that its owner has done. Most of the car works. One of the things that doesn't currently is the heater. However, I am told that when the heater is operational, it is actually quite effective. The fantastic thing about driving a car like this is that it's really truly one of the few ways that we in the modern age can have a real direct connection to our past. It's not like driving this is like our predecessors had it. This is exactly how people had it. I'm pretty sure when this thing was on the road, it was a fairly sporty car. I did the maths, and when this was new, it cost the equivalent of about £15,500. I'm sure back then it was quite a bit of money, being about 600 odd quid in the 1950s, but it's not a huge sum, is it? You're talking entry-level MX-5 money. It's a shame, really, that Austin Healey was one of the many British brands that disappeared in the last sort of 30 or 40 years, because they did make, for their time, some really fantastic cars. Driving something like this, I sort of feel so underqualified because my experience with things of this vintage is so limited. I mean, most of the stuff I've driven from the 50s was weird French stuff, and this is really quite different to any of those. Those were sort of mostly pickups and saloon cars and things like that. The Smith's gauges down here, well, half of them work and one of them is only working part-time. The Speedo does what most old cars do, and it does that kind of thing, but honestly, I think chances of speeding in this car are pretty minimal. The Morgan Plus 4 that I drove recently was a bit of a disappointment for one simple reason. You get in it and so much about it feels quite modern that when you start to try and chuck it down the road like a modern car, it won't have any of your nonsense. So driving this is actually much more pleasant because none of it feels modern, and so you don't treat it like a modern car. You know that it's just not going to be thrown about like a hatchback or a modern sports car or anything like that, so you just don't try, and as a result you enjoy yourself so much more. That Morgan was so good at going quick that it was such a disappointment when you realise that actually it was totally ill-equipped for doing so. Ultimately, driving this thing is in many ways a bit of a reminder for me as to why I enjoy driving the Honda S2000 so much. Granted, it's an entirely different type of car, and I completely accept that, but the point of them both is the same. They are about enjoying driving. Not necessarily speed, but driving, and they're a way of enjoying cars. This car, I've no doubt, is so much more than a collection of metal and rubber to its owner. Okay, maybe on a day like today I'm going to be looking at this thing with rose-tinted glasses. Not quite as rosy as this car's cherry red paintwork, but rosy nonetheless. Ultimately, the biggest surprise to me with this thing is just actually how easy it is to drive normally. And truthfully, how ridiculously enjoyable it is. It's wonderful. I never have one because it's just not my cup of tea, but I'm so very thankful for people like this car's owner taking the time and enjoying it properly, because nowadays we see far too many immaculate examples of this kind of car tucked away in glass cases, never to be used, when the people that bought these first time round, I know they'd have been proud of this car's owner for just keeping it going the old-fashioned way. If you're going to take anything from today's video, whatever it is that you drive, just take it out and go nowhere in particular, because we should probably enjoy that while we're still allowed to. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.
Well.